And welcome back to Sullivan's Unheard Voices. I'm back with two of my favorite human beings on the planet.
Hi,
Thank you,
Shawn.
Aimee. Thank you, Nicole. I wanted to have a conversation today about acceptance and movements
Oh, yeah.
because here's what I see playing out, and correct me if I'm wrong, right? Because I see all of these individualized movements to make things better for a certain population.
Mm-hmm.
Yet for some reason, it seems like those movements are working in a silo. So how do we have a conversation with people that are doing amazing work, but also saying, hey, there's a group of people over here that's doing very similar work, and imagine how much more powerful we could be if we would work together towards a common goal.
Mm-hmm.
What's stopping us from doing that?
There's a lot there.
Yeah,
That's a big question. I think people, let me speak for myself. I think I sometimes get scared that if I join hands with other people, what matters to me is going to get lost. Because I'm just like, but you weren't paying attention to this to begin with. So if I join hands with you, why do I think you will still pay attention to this thing that you weren't paying attention to? Which, is not a great, I'm not super proud of that reality, but, that is part of what's real for me.
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think that is the reality is when you start to lump too many groups together, those intricacies do get lost. That's why it's so important to have things like affinity groups and to really focus on the subgroups that have different needs than, the collective. I think that what's stopping us from working in solidarity, though, across these different efforts is it's really complicated, right? There's a couple of parts of it. I think one of them is that people are really focused on their own specific experience and their own specific identity, and that's really valid. I also think, though, that there's been a concerted effort to keep us at odds with each other, to keep us from supporting each other, because there is a lot of strength in that solidarity and in working together. That I don't think that people who are in positions of power really want us to recognize. So I think it's kind of by design and it's kind of by happenstance, but there's a lot to unpack there.
And I can't ignore both sides of that, right? Because I see where you're coming from, Aimee, because there are many times where I feel like I'm swimming upstream, I'm fighting against systems of oppression, and it takes a lot of bandwidth for me to focus on my narrow thing, because when you're pushing against oppression, it's tiresome because it's so in your face and there's so many forces against any particular movement. And I think a lot of it has to do with what you're saying too, Nicole, where the power structure is also sort of combination of both ends.
And I think it doesn't help that the power structure says, oh, if you just make yourself appeasable, presentable, and likable, of course we'll do what you want. When actually the way we're going to get inclusion and progress is by saying, hey, this structure overall is broken. This is the structure overall is broken, and we have to pull apart some of these things that have been norms for us to actually be able to have inclusion. I think about conversations, it's super common around queerness, right? We a lot of progress, some legally protected progress has been made by appealing to look, we're just like you.
Yeah.
We're and on one hand there's some truth there, on the other hand that then pushes folks in our community even farther outside of the circle of protection. And I think about conversations I've had around neurodiversity, but also like abolition, where it's like you have to be, we're okay at making accommodations sometimes when we know, like, oh, we know that's your deal, right? So we can make an accommodation for you, rather than shifting the system to say, like, we don't need people to fit in this box to begin with. Because if it's only when one person specifically advocates for themselves, we're not getting free that way, right? Like, we have to shift it to be bigger, to be like, this person's kind of weird, but let's make space for them, and I don't need to know their deal, and I don't need to know why, but like, maybe this is actually just within the realm of normal human behavior,
Yeah.
and not the like pretty little box that I want everything to fit in because that's how I was trained.
You know,
And I go ahead, Nicole.
Oh no, I was just gonna say I think that that's a really good point. That I think we've been siloed for so long that when we are in space with people who have other marginalized identities who are fighting other fights, we don't know what that's like. We don't have a frame of reference, and so we think that they're weird. I'm using air quotes to quote Aimee here. Like, it's not that they're weird, it's just that that's a different experience that we've never been exposed to. And I think that one of the things that we could really do in order to create these intersectional fights would be to work on a system to create a universally designed system where we can all kind of access it with whatever backgrounds we have, whatever nuances or weirdnesses we have, where it's accessible. I think that a lot of these things aren't accessible to people, whether that's through disability, or if it's just like, I've never had this experience. I don't know what the norms are. I don't know what the culture is. Creating spaces where people really can meld and bring their full authentic selves, I think, is a big part of it.
And I can appreciate that on so many levels, because I think a lot of people, they don't realize just how vulnerable you have to be putting yourself in a position to stand up and say something.
Yeah.
And just acknowledging that you're a part of a group, then it sort of in turn automatically ostracizes you from other groups. And that's something I see play out like all the time. And like, why can't we have a space where people can just be? At the same time, though, like I remember just a few weeks ago, I was invited to a choir here in Salem that is all accepting and all encumbersome. They don't care what your background is. They don't care what your disability is. They don't care. You're welcome to sing as part of this choir. And so I think as more spaces like that come open to people, I think we can kind of normalize it. But I think we need to have more exposure of all of these groups getting along together in celebration. Because I would love it to have, like, when we have these groups get together and celebrate, instead of it always being together to fight against something.
Yeah.
Because it gets exhausting. Like, the constant fight gets exhausting.
Yeah.
And so how do you celebrate, come together?
And I think in a lot of our siloed spaces, we've been doing a lot of education, at least in my like adulthood, which is really like necessary in order to get to some of these spaces. Like, because unless we have an understanding of like major forms of oppression, because we're in this like dominant, like cis hetero patriarchy capitalist society, white capitalist society, like unless we're unlearning things in order to truly be able to like welcome and include others, like we're going to show up into space and not even realize we're hurting people.
Yeah.
And so I think the education that has been going on has been an important part of like the maturity model in order to be able to truly get to some of those spaces.
Can you pause for a second?
Yeah.
Can you explain a little bit more about the maturity model? This is the first I'm hearing.
Oh, so maturity model is I don't know where it actually comes from, but I think some form of like business or project management of like, okay, well, this is where we are today and this is where we'd like to go. And there's like in between steps, right? And we'll know we're at the next level when we're seeing this, this, and this. And so, like, our goal is creating these joyful spaces of truly inclusive community. And prior to doing that, we need to come together as different communities. And prior to doing that, we need to learn how we can stop harming folks from other communities so that we can then be in space together, so that we can have this truly joyful, inclusive community.
Mm.
So, like, in my mind, a lot of the education work is part of the building step to that point.
I appreciate that so much. Because there's a lot of talk about like the medical model versus this model, that model.
Oh, yeah.
I like that approach.
And I heard it from folks in the racial justice realm. Like, I remember Melissa Sampson, who works at ODHS, brought it to our child welfare racial equity leadership team several years ago that talked about, like, what does a maturity model for racial justice look like within an agency? And so then I just kind of took that, like, oh, framework, and have, like, slowly incorporated it into things because it made a lot of sense to me. Because I was like, oh, okay, well, and I can see the markers of, like, here's where we are, here's where we want to go.
And I can see, like, in the circles that I am in, we don't have that currently.
Yeah, like, we don't have we don't even always have a vision of where we want to go.
Yeah.
Let alone, like, how are we going to get there?
Oh my gosh, the power of a vision statement is, like, I can't overstate it, because you can get a group of really passionate people together and be like, we want to fix stuff, and everyone's going to be like, yeah, and then you get 6 months down the line and you realize everyone's on a different page. Knowing where you want to go is really important.
Because, to Shawn's point, there's so much to fix.
Yeah.
But, like, at some point we have to have a vision of, like, this is where we're going, and then, like, just make a plan of, like, how are we going to get there? And it doesn't have to be perfect, right? But any sense of, like, okay, how do we get to the next step in order to achieve this, I think is really helpful.
And that kind of leaves the room for the successes along the way, too.
Yeah, exactly.
Because as you're hitting benchmarks or hitting steps, you can take the time and acknowledge, wow, that was a lot of work, but we got this done.
Right.
Huh. Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
And then the other question that I want to pose in this forum is a question I get all the time.
Okay.
How do we explain intersectionality?
Oh, Nicole is so good at this.
That's why I said it.
Nicole is so good at this. I'm going to pass it to her.
Okay, intersectionality? Yeah. Okay. So I think that the best way to explain it is actually just giving the story of where it comes from, because it's a legal term that came from legal scholar Kimberly Crenshaw, who saw this legal case where General Motors, they employed Black people to work in the manufacturing part of their company. But they only employed men in that section, but they employed Black people. They also employed women, and that was only for secretarial duties, but they also only employed white women. But on a legal basis, there is no case for them being racist or sexist, because they do employ men and women and Black and white people. And so it's this framework that recognizes that when you have multiple identities that experience marginalization, they come together to create an entirely new category. Like that General Motors example, Black women weren't hired anywhere, but there was no, like, legal support for them. And so when we look at it, we can take it out of context from that, but you have Black women is an intersection. You have queer disabled people, that's an intersection. And all of these intersections create their entirely new form of marginalization and oppression that can't just be solved by solving either one or the other. You can't solve the intersection of misogynoir, which is misogyny based on against Black women, by fixing sexism or racism, because that doesn't fix that intersection. So that's what intersectionality is to me.
And I think the thing with it, the term becoming more popular, I think folks often use it for like intersecting identities.
Yes.
Which I want to call out that difference because, like,
Yes.
as a white queer woman, like, that's an intersection of being queer and being a woman, but it doesn't it doesn't compound privilege in the same way.
Right.
Right.
I'm also a queer white woman, and I don't have the, like, queerness and womanhood is an intersection that causes an intersectionality form of oppression, but it's not the same thing as just listing all of your identities.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think often we try to be inclusive in a way that is that like addresses different aspects of identity but isn't truly intersectional.
Yeah.
But we use intersectional as a shorthand to talk about we're considering multiple aspects of identity, which is like a misuse of it kind of drives me crazy sometimes because it's a misuse of the word in common vernacular because that's not what it means, and we're not looking at like that compound marginalization, which is actually it has to be addressed specifically.
And I have an example.
Oh.
So the example I always come to, and I really appreciate the nuance, right, is so as a parent, and I'm not a parent, but I know so many parents of children who are autistic have to have a different conversation about police and fire department.
Yeah.
If you're Black and you have a child that's autistic, you have to have a vastly different conversation about police departments and fire departments. And the solution is really a more targeted approach to training towards those intersectionalities because it's a universal problem, but it impacts a very small group of intersectionality of where people that are not of that dominant culture may end up getting shot because they flap the wrong way around police officers.
You know, I think that's actually a really good example to use to explain why when you focus on those like really niche marginalized groups, those really like it's not everyone who is going to interact with police is going to be a Black autistic person, right? But if you create a system and policies and procedures that accommodate Black autistic people, then the people who are also deaf and can't hear you, the people who are, they don't speak English as their first language, there's so many other groups that are going to benefit from creating policies and procedures that support that most marginalized or most oppressed group.
And then the other part of that too is the reality is it wouldn't take that much effort, especially in that regard, right? So like to have a training program in place to train law enforcement to react to certain situations would not be that difficult. Getting law enforcement to actually follow the procedures and do the training and all that stuff seems to be the biggest hurdle.
I mean, spicy opinion. I think you'd need actually like a pretty drastic change to the culture of policing in order for that to be effective. Coming at you from a police officer's daughter.
Yeah.
I think that like the way that I have watched my family and friends be encultured in policing in the US right now is to view everything and everyone as a threat. And so I think actually in order for that to be effective, it would require a pretty drastic change because it would be so countercultural to what is currently promoted.
That's a really good point.
Because like you could do the training, but like unless you solve that like underlying culture, I don't think you're actually going to have the outcomes that you need.
That's exactly
Nicole
it.
has a thought.
That's
Yeah.
exactly it. No, like I'm an equity trainer. People tell me all the time, throw a training at it and that'll fix it. And I can tell you from experience, that is never going to work. A training is not going to be the fix. Like this is, I'm worried about my job security here, but training doesn't fix it. It is a culture shift that fixes it. And that requires so much more work, which is why people want to throw a training at it. Because that's just easier.
And I think people want to throw a training at it because, in some ways, because they recognize how bad it is right now. And that's like, we got to fix it now.
And that's better than nothing.
But sometimes it isn't.
Sometimes it isn't.
Because people then take the language of your training and weaponize it against other people.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes it worse. Or, I don't know, I have experienced then feeling extra unseen. Because I know the people around me know. Like, I sat through this training with them, and they still don't see me. So then it's like, oh, they're choosing that now. Oh, gross.
Yeah.
Which is hard. Like, yeah.
That's a tough one. And culture shifts are always the ones that are the hardest.
Well, we also choose not to invest in them. So, like, would it be that hard if we actually, like, committed to the bit? I don't, like... But, like, it's super scary to, like, have that conversation and say, hey, actually, I think everything needs to change.
Yeah.
You know...
Like... No, I'm just rambling.
Oh,
Go
no.
ahead.
I was just going to say, I heard, and I'm sure it was a Simon Sinek or whatever, but, like, which I'm not going to get into. But it was a video about how culture change, you need, like, less than 20% of people to actually get the ball rolling, but like it seems like such a task, right? Like you've got, let's say 100 people, you have some of them who are just never gonna change, you have some of them who are totally on board, but most of the people are kind of in this in between. And I think that what we can really work on is focusing on those people on the in between and trying to create the little bit of change that we can, because that really does roll into a bigger culture shift. It is more than just making sure everyone has a training. It does require active effort and like continuous support of it, but it doesn't require this huge monumental change from everyone all at once. It's not that daunting. And I think we can take that into our social justice spaces too. Like if it's a space where we're trying to make a queer space more, disability friendly, it just takes a couple of us going, could we also include ASL interpreters? Could we also make sure that stage is accessible? Like it's not that much. It's just a little bit of.
Can I soapbox for just a second talking about accessible stages? I was at a meeting for work celebrating the excellent work of our employee resource groups. Oh, I'm going to get in trouble for saying this on here. Whatever. It was a problem. And so at ODHS, as you know, one of the groups is AbleNet for disabled employees. They were recognized with an award. The stage wasn't accessible. And the presenters didn't come down off the stage. And so our colleague, who walks with a cane, tripped on the way up. And so one of our other Pride colleagues was teasing with him and said, oh, you're just reenacting the Capitol crawl here at the ERG Awards ceremony, and which was like the appropriate humor for the time, but also it's just like, y'all, they knew there were so many ways to avoid this, and instead it was still, it was ostracization when there should have been belonging.
Yes. And I know of a few people that would not have been able to get up on the stage at all.
Yeah.
Had they attended that event.
Right. And
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then my soapbox to go along with that one.
Yeah, yeah.
You see a story about this news story about this family. Their son gets cerebral palsy.
Yeah.
So they had to build a ramp
Yeah.
to get him in and out of the house.
Yeah.
And the homeowners association comes and complains and says you can't have a ramp and that you need to move it out and you need to carry your disabled son. And they don't feel any qualms about being on the news saying that if you don't like it, you can move to a different neighborhood.
That's
Down with
gross.
HOAs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh.
Disgusting.
So it happens all the time.
Yeah.
Like all the time.
I just expected my workplace to be better about that. To just think through who they're honoring.
Yeah.
You know,
the place that does things at casinos.
Okay, that's a complicated subject.
I know.
Because they're tribally owned.
Yeah.
And it's a way of, on one hand, it's a little bit of a way of reparations, right? Of hey, we're going to ensure that the money that we're spending is going into a marginalized community. It's complicated. And I think we don't talk about the addiction aspect of that. We don't talk about others, but I do think that is one that is nuanced.
I agree. I shouldn't have brought it up, but I will say I think that if we can give that money to tribal entities, I do want to do that. And I have had multiple people specifically tell me that they cannot go to our events because they are going to be somewhere that is too activating for their addictions.
That's fair.
I've heard that on a few occasions too.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I don't think we take that seriously enough.
I feel like addictions, and especially with, and soapbox time.
Soapbox.
No, addictions around things like alcohol, which is legal, and gambling, which is not something that people think of as being an addictive thing or don't really give credibility to. Those two are really downplayed, and I feel like the people that we did a series this month on substance use disorders and the language that we use around them, and I had people reaching out to me directly going, I need to talk about this. I had mothers of children who have addictions. I had children of mothers who had addictions. I had people who had their own addictions, and they are so common. They're so common, but it's such a stigmatized thing to talk about that in our queer spaces, especially, we do not consider the fact that our queer community has such a high rate of addiction that that intersection needs to also be really, really considered.
Yep.
100%. And I can't help but think about all of, I know too many veterans that have substance use issues because the VA would just send them a prescription of painkillers in the mail.
Right.
I can attest this has happened to me in the past, right? You go to the doctor because you have to go every year for the VA for your annual checkup.
Oh, really?
And so because I'm service connected and I go in and I complain that I'm in pain because I am, but I don't want any medication, there have been no less than 4 times where I didn't ask for it. I wasn't wanting it. But then again, it just showed up in the mail. Here's 160 Vicodin.
Oh, my God.
There you go. And that's happened 4 times in my life where it just there you go. And you wonder why the veteran population is addicted on opiates. Is because a lot of times, up until recently, the VA prescription was just, here you go, it's 120 Vicodin, have fun. And they would just dole that out like candy all the time.
Oh my gosh.
I know so many veterans that got hooked on painkillers because
and this
of
is
that.
where these intersections need to be explored, because when you think about things like mental health, queerness, veterans, there are these intersections that that influence all of them. And so if you were to create policies or whatever that looked at addictions, it's not going to just help one category. And so we need to be coming into these conversations united and looking at how these specific topics influence all of our communities.
And I think to that, like, too, it's that generally, and I could be wrong, but as far as I know, generally addiction comes out of a self-medication.
Yeah.
Like, or prescribed medication, right? But like, and that's often like with a trauma root
Well,
behind
100%.
it. Like, and it's different trauma, right? For, I mean, and there's an overlap between LGBTQ folks and veterans, but like often we're trying to like deal with the trauma that we're carrying from our various sources. And so like we don't live in a resource full world. Or we do,
No.
but there's capitalism. That's a whole shtick. We're all on
Capitalism.
the same soapbox there.
Yeah.
But like it's trying to deal with this trauma with no tools. And so you grab the only tools that you have because it's awful.
And there's really no help with the mental health piece. I mean, it's come a long way in the last, I don't know, 3 or 4 years, where they have a commitment towards mental health and veterans. But like, I remember when I got out of the military, they didn't ever talk about mental health. There was never a class on like what it would be like to transition back, what it would be like for all of that mental health aspect of it. Like that's just non-existent.
Oh no.
Yeah, so you're just sort of left in this military culture. You're used to this routine. You have all this structure. You have this command environment, and then you were released to the wild, so to speak, without any sort of processing of what it's going to be like once you get out. And they don't make that connection between that and losing your entire structure that you've been brainwashed into, and now you have no support structure, nobody to lean on, no peers, nobody that sort of understands you. And then that's what leads to those suicidal ideation, which is what leads to this 22 a day.
Yeah.
Is because you just don't feel like you belong anywhere.
And why would and I think when I have experienced suicidal ideation, it's also that belief that it's not getting better.
Oh yeah.
Like we're just stuck, like it's just not going to get better. And like, why wouldn't you believe that?
Yeah.
Like, hot take, I think sometimes those beliefs are true.
Yeah.
And I got real spicy at the Walk Out of Darkness this year because I'm like, but like some of these things are not wrong. Like I believe that no one's going to be there because here I am sobbing at the suicide prevention walk and nobody from my group has noticed. So like I think my belief that I'm alone is actually correct.
Yeah.
Okay, but I will fight you.
I know. I don't have plans.
I'm just kidding. I'm with you though entirely. Like we don't
like I just don't think we're crazy. People are like, you believe these things and it's a temporary, you know, like a temporary problem. And I'm like, it's a very long temporary problem.
Yeah.
It is actually like it's an ongoing problem with therapists right now because and I'm kind of ghosting my therapist. That's a long story, but she's great. I love her. But also we got into this groove of so what's going on? And me going, capitalism, I'm tired all the time, I don't get paid enough. And it's just things that are true. And she's like, I don't know how to fix any of that. And that is a ongoing issue with therapists right now where they're like, how do I dispute this? It's true. And like, and I'm not saying that to like be doom and gloom because there is a lot worth living for. The world's not all doom and gloom, and capitalism sucks, and sometimes things suck.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And some days you do feel alone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know? And then you have that other part too, right? I don't know if you all feel this, but I feel this towards the two of you, right? I love you. I think you're amazing people. I also wrestle with like, why would she want to hang out with me? Why don't I ask her like, can we hang out sometime and do? Because I always have that fear of like, I don't understand why people like me, and so I have to wrestle that image too of like, I don't understand why people like me, and then wrestling that along with the fear of like reaching out and you know because it's like you feel like alone at times.
Shawn, you are like. It's funny that you say that that's the last thing because you're not alone in that. Like I have heard so many people in my life go, why do people like me? And sometimes I think that comes out at least when I was younger, like, you know, it would be like, well, tell me why you like me. And people would think that that's attention seeking. But attention seeking is seeking out a necessary, needed thing. Like, that is attention and support and love and all of those things are critical. And so if you're seeking those things out, that's really important to actually validate. And I'm not going to do this on the spot here, but I will just throw out one of my favorite things to do with my sister. Whenever anyone's having kind of one of those moments of like, why do people like me? Or I'm just having a bad day. We would go, we're going to yell 30 seconds of kindness at you and time it and just yell nice things about the person at them. It was one of the most affirming things to be on either end, the receiving or the giving end. And I would love to encourage people, if you are ever seeing someone who doesn't see their own self-worth, spend 30 seconds just telling them the things that you like about them, because it means a lot. And I could do that for you, Shawn, but I'm not going to do it on the spot. But
I appreciate
plenty
that so
of
much,
reasons.
Nicole. But it's one of those things, right? Where, we just did a podcast with Nikki Jones, who lost her sister to suicide last year, and the importance of letting people know that you are around, and letting people know that they are loved. It goes a long way.
Yeah.
And it's something we don't seem to want to talk about as well. You know, it's kind of strange.
Yeah, every time I worry that I'm too much, because I do around that, because I'm the person who'll just be like, you're so great and I'm so glad you're in my life. I'm just like, I might be a bit much, but I think the world needs a little bit more.
Yes.
So, and maybe that's just the way it is. Like, but so when I partake in herbal supplements, I often get more reflective. And so I'm reading from a note that I have. And so it goes, okay, Siri, how to be less desperately starved and grateful when receiving support and be more cool. Bestie, I fear you might not like the answer. Because the options are 1, get more support, or 2, be less expressive all around. Because you've already decided to be your expressive self, so the way you stop seeming needy is by getting your needs met. And the desperate vibe you're giving off is actually a normal and healthy way that humans signal to each other the depth of this need. Your body is non-verbally calling for help, and others' bodies are translating your distress. What you gotta do is stop feeling bad about how you sound.
Aimee.
Hi, Aimee was right. I was not a fan of that information, buddy. I did need to know it.
I'm letting that sink in.
What was that line about the way that you seem less needy is by getting your needs met?
Yep.
Oh my god.
The way you stop seeming needy is by getting your needs met.
And how much time do we actually think about what our needs are? Because I don't think I spend enough time thinking about that.
I only think about what my needs are when I'm not getting them met.
Right?
But I don't even think, I think sometimes when I'm not getting them met, I'm getting better at having some nuanced vocabulary for it, right? Of like, hello, I need affirmation. Or hello, I need to hang out. Or, hello, I need to be reminded that you still love me even when I'm not pretty. And pretty being like, you know, either physically pretty or just like put together and ready to go and doing all the girl bossy things.
Yeah, because there are days when you just don't feel pretty when you walk out of the house.
Yeah.
And those are the days that you need that affirmation the most.
Right. The people that love me are still going to be there.
Yeah.
Because, again, to the spicy thought, not everybody is.
Yeah.
So, like, there's a reason that we develop these masks and these coping mechanisms, and because it's a little bit true. But there are people, and I would wager that most of us have at least one person in our life who will be there, even when it's ugly. And sometimes I need that reminder from one of those people of like, I don't have to put on a mask for you. I don't have to like be perfect and ready to go. I can just be myself.
I hope you know I'm only a phone call away.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Because it's important.
Yeah, it is.
So now that we sort of had this sort of roundabout conversation about all these awesome things, I do want to kind of circle back to sort of what we were talking about in the beginning. Because, like, just in this little short exercise of supporting each other, like, how do we go about supporting other people? Because, like, I can guarantee you, if I would have seen you crying at that event, I would have dropped everything to come over and say, what's going on?
Yeah.
How can I help? But I'm also more in tune to that recently. That was not always the case.
Yeah.
Situations in my life have changed to where I'm way more in tune with what's going on with around me because I finally have permission where I can. And that's been a totally different experience.
Do you all ever find, and I know that this is like not answering your question, but when I'm in space with other people and they're not catching those, like, this person is obviously very visibly upset, or this person has been trying to break into the conversation and keeps getting cut off, or whatever it is, like, I get so annoyed because I can't personally fathom that they don't see it. I don't know, like, is it normal to not notice that in other people, or am I just attuned to it?
Don't ask me. I have hypervigilance as one of my number one saboteurs, so I'm always looking out for that stuff because I have survived abuse where I had to be hyper aware of everything that was happening around me.
Yes.
Okay, but same.
So I'm a bad sample size.
Oh.
Sorry.
Oh, okay,
Right.
I understand. Anyway.
I don't know.
And I can kind of speak to that, right? Because before my autism diagnosis, I wouldn't have noticed things like that. I didn't even know people communicated with their eyes until I was 40 years old.
Okay, that's fair.
I had no idea that an eye roll actually conveyed a message.
And that it's not an actual roll of the whole eye, like...
Okay, look, I learned that like 2 months ago.
I know, me too.
No judgment. I didn't know either, right? So,
yeah.
But since I've started working at the state and things have sort of opened my eyes to like other people's experiencing and actually being more in tune, I see it more now because I have a vested interest in making sure, you know, I'm no longer struggling so much on myself and how I fit because I didn't know I was autistic.
Yeah.
Now that I know I'm autistic and I know that there's certain limitations, I'm way more open to seeing what's around me because I give myself permission to sort of try and translate. Whereas before it was just like, I don't understand it. It makes no sense to me. I'm not even paying attention.
I feel like that's a great example of like you're able to meet your own needs.
Yeah.
And then you're able to be attuned to others.
Yeah.
I will say one thing, circling back to your question, that I have been learning, especially the past couple of weeks in conversations with my work team, is in order to get to that place of inclusion, like one of those interim steps is recognizing like and recognizing those for whom it is more risky to show up as their authentic selves and creating that safer space because and again it pulls into what we talked about with intersectionality, Nicole. Like one of my colleagues is a biracial Black woman who is neurodivergent, and the responses she has gotten over her lifetime when asking for accommodations have been vastly different. And so it took her a long time to even feel comfortable asking anymore because of how she's been treated. And so I'm thinking about like, we've got to also be creating these new patterns where we are like proactively affirming that safety and belonging for folks who often don't experience it, so that people are even able to show up with less of a mask on.
Right.
And I can't begin to talk about how much of a difference being able to show up as your authentic self is.
Yeah.
It's so rare. It's such a luxury to be in a spot where you can be authentically autistic and just be. Like, that is such a rare thing. Because, like, I mean, I run support groups for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And the one theme that I hear time and time again is right around that. Like, it's all about, like, the conversations and how you're viewed as soon as you ask for accommodations.
Yeah.
It's like, all of a sudden, there's a target. Yeah.
Which is wild, because it's often not even that much. To Nicole's point of, like, how do people not... I'm just like, oh, I just need to be a little more direct? Oh, yeah, cool, no problem. Like, I need to say the thing instead of just thinking the thing?
Whoa.
Cool, no problem. Like, my coworker, in asking me, was like, hey, can you do less busy stuff on screen? Because it's really hard for my ADHD to stay focused. And I was like, oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, thank you. And also, like, now I didn't know to think about that for other people.
Yeah.
Like, that was my own, like, not being able to read that room, Nicole. And now I'm like, oh, here's a way I can be mindful going forward, that, like, I am, like, proactively taking care of my community.
Feedback is such a gift, and it's one
It
that is not
is.
given lightly, because and actually I've been kind of thinking about this as we've been talking, is the idea of access fatigue, where people who have had to fight for access to the basics of life every day, every time they want to access anything, that is a fatigue, right? And so, like, if you want to get to have a job, in be in community with people, it's exhausting. And so, in order to like, if someone who is experiencing that fatigue all the time of trying to get their basic needs met is willing to give you feedback, that is an additional spoon that they're giving you. And I think that we should be taking it as the gift that that spoon is.
That's a good point, and I think it's something worth repeating too, because I think that there's harm in some of the language that's used around this.
Can you say more? Because I don't know much about. I had never thought about, like, access fatigue before. It makes a lot of sense, but this is new information for me.
Yeah, and when people provide that feedback, the general assumption is that the person is going after. So, like, for example, God, okay, so I'm going to throw this out there. I went to Biscuits Cafe with Paco. He was still my service dog.
Paco.
And they verbally, in front of everybody, gave me a hard time about bringing my service dog into the restaurant.
Yeah.
And they said, well, we'll allow you this time, but next time we probably won't allow you. And when I pushed back at that, the general assumption is, I'm trying to get something. No, I want it so other people don't experience what I experienced.
Yeah.
So when people provide that feedback, I want people to know that that feedback is coming from a place where I don't want someone else to go through what I just went through. It's not about being punitive. It's not about being a gotcha or I'm showing you up or I'm superior. It really is like, this felt like crap. I don't want somebody else to experience this. I'm going to say something.
Yeah.
And I think that's a different conversation than people tend to have. It's like, you're calling me out for such and such a behavior.
And I wonder, you two would be great people to ask, because having recently been in this situation of receiving feedback and knowing in my head, like, this is a gift, I'm super grateful because this is a sign that someone wants to stay in relationship with me, right? Because if otherwise you just write it off, right?
Yeah.
Like, I am trying to learn how to manage my own then nervous system reaction that is like, oh my God, this is terrible. And like, I know it's not. And I can control, like, you know, I have enough practice, right? I can control my language. I can control how I present to someone else. And I wish there was a better how to for like how to handle your own nervous system reaction so that I'm like, I still need to process this somehow. And I'm not super sure how. Like, I know the right answer. I don't know how to make it sustainable.
Therapy.
You know, I'm already in therapy.
I've heard wonders about EMDR.
Bro, you heard wonders about EMDR from me.
Okay, and also other people, but also you.
No, that's a good point though, right? Because I remember like and Nicole's heard me talk about it before. The first time I was kind of told by somebody about the difference between non-speaking and nonverbal about autistic.
Oh, can you tell me?
Yeah, so this whole idea of being nonverbal is non-existent.
Oh.
So just because you're not able to speak doesn't mean you don't understand language.
Oh, sure. Okay.
And so the default is, and I used to say nonverbal all the time.
Yeah.
Until somebody who was non-speaking came up to me and told me, like, look, this is how it means, this is what it means.
Yeah.
But then you have that internal dialogue of that gut punch, like,
right.
Oh no, I just screwed up.
Yeah.
And so basically what I did is I told the person that I was going to commit to never using that terminology in public again.
Yeah.
And then it's just keeping that mental knowledge. But you're right. It's that initial, like, oh no, like, because we try so hard not to step in it.
Right.
And when we do step in it, we kind of like take it personally because we try so hard not to.
Right.
I don't know the easy answer, but it's just,
what
are you going to say, Nicole?
I think though, Shawn, that you did really well with that because like you said, we have talked about this before. You took it a step further than just committing that to your own language, but you've actually like taken the effort to educate other people. And I think that that's really where we can, if we're going back to the idea of intersectional identities and intersectionality and supporting these movements cross silos, right? Like you can take something that doesn't apply to you and champion it and make sure that other people know it. And it's more than just, now I know, which is a great first step. But I think that something that is, it's more important that we go that step above where we're disseminating the information too.
Mm-hmm. Also, spicy thought. I recently had someone in my life who was the parent to an autistic person and would use nonverbal and just talk about how there was a lack of communication. And it wasn't my lane, but I wanted to shake this person and be like, get your child an AAC board.
Yeah.
Yes.
Like, get your child tools for communication. You should know better.
It's 2024.
Well, this person had also like worked with
start them on sign language
autistic like individuals throughout their career, and I was like, and also and I was just, there were so many things, but that was one of them where I was like, this is a red flag.
And the sad part is they probably got that advice from their doctor. So there was up until 3 or 4 years ago, research and suggestions were to not do that for your child.
Really? Why?
Because the idea was, for some reason or another, they thought if you did that, you were taking away their ability to learn how to speak.
But this person's daughter is a grown adult.
Yeah.
It's like
who's incredibly vulnerable.
Yeah. It's like telling people that they're too young to use mobility devices because that'll take away their ability to learn how to walk. And I'm using air quotes.
I've heard that too. Yeah.
Like, I would rather someone be able to ambulate regardless of how they do it. I would rather someone be able to communicate regardless of how they do it.
Right.
At the very least, teach them how to ask for their basic needs.
Right.
You know, teach them to sign their address. Teach
Right.
them to sign their
It's a
parents'
safety
names.
issue.
It's a safety, 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Like, this is why there's such high rates of people being abused who can't speak.
And this person worried about that for their daughter. And I was like, it wasn't my, where it just like was not my lane. And I kind of wish that I would have figured out a way to make it somewhat my lane before this person left my life. But like,
well, now if you come across that, you can always point it my way.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard when, as you know, like you're way deeper in this than I am, but like when parents of autistic people think they know best, trying to get through that is
challenging.
Yeah.
Especially when you have a parent who thinks they know better than their child.
Yeah.
Who is on the spectrum. I was like, your child, let me please try and translate for you what's going on. And they're like, no, I don't want to hear that. It's like, yeah. Anyway. Mm-hmm. I feel your pain on that one.
I know. I knew you would. I'm just like, oh. Okay.
So then as we sort of progress though, like moving forward, right? Like how do we sort of bridge that gap? Like, because one of the things that like I noticed, right, for example, we don't have any sort of like we have certain things that we have like walks and pride events and things for, certain things we don't.
Yeah.
Like, is there an opportunity for like a joint event of some kind? And what might that look like? Or is there one already that I just don't even know about? I don't know the answer.
I see Aimee thinking, so I'll start off with
please do.
I think that we need to do a little bit of both and, where we need to make events accessible and culturally responsive cross culture, cross identity. So like I want to see pride events be physically and sensory accessible for people. I want to see I want to see any sort of disability pride events in general. Plus, I want them to be, supportive of their the people with disabilities who are also people of color, right? Like we need to have these intersectional lenses in the spaces that already exist and that are specific to our different identities, our different backgrounds. And I do think that there needs to be some more intersectional spaces where it's like, let's really specifically look at what it's like to be deaf and queer. And I use queerness as a default just because that's one that I hold. So I it's not just that. I'm also including all of the other identities that there are, but
we can call our own people in, I think, easier than we can call other people, right? Of like, all right, y'all, this one's on us.
Yes.
Because I know there's one thing also that I've noticed in the autism realm in particular is we have disproportionately way more people who are autistic who are also queer or bi or gay than other intersectionalities. So much so that we have like a bigger women and non-binary support group than we do groups for men who are autistic. And that was very eye-opening to me.
There's a reason for that, actually.
Do tell if you know.
Well, I mean, and this is all theory. I'm not a gender scientist.
That just sounds wrong. Like,
know, right?
genders.
No,
So
but
we know what you mean.
I know what you mean. Yeah, sorry.
There is something about when you are neurodivergent and you are already questioning norms and you're already questioning, like, why is it that we do it that way? That seems silly. These rules don't make sense. And then you start applying that to gender is a social construct with rules that don't make sense. You have sexuality, which is a construct which has rules that don't make sense. And so you start to see more non-binary and queer, even people who are like, you see more polyamorous people who are neurodivergent because they are more willing to look at the structures that we've just decided are normal and go, why? Wait, that doesn't make sense. And are willing to question it and willing to push back against it. And so there is a really big overlap between those communities.
And I think, like, circling back to the question too, I think that, like, it's easier to get people fired up about a fight.
Yeah.
Right? And
Yeah.
so, like, bringing people together across some of those differences, particularly in a joyful way, I think that that's new. It's both really old territory, right? And really new at the same time.
Yes.
And I think too about, like, because I've thought about, like, for groups who don't have more public celebrations, and I think sometimes about, like, how the weight of capitalism and oppression means that people don't have either the energy or the resources to put those things together. And, like, where is the lane? And, you know, because even just organizing takes effort, takes spoons, takes a lot of work. So, like, I don't have an answer to it at all, but it's something that I wrestle with on, like, occasion, to be like, well, I really wish this were the thing. It's not my lane to make or lead, but I would support it. But it, you know, like, there's some amount of, like, what gets created is what's needed at the time.
It's also, it's what gets created is what's needed at the time and what someone puts the effort into.
Yeah, it's absolutely true.
It doesn't have to be the same someone. It doesn't have to be like some grand someone. Like, I think that we talk a lot about things as if some magical entity is going to come and make it happen. And it has to be us.
Yeah.
And I'm in a weird situation where, like, I would like to be that someone on, like, 20 different things.
Yes, I know.
Like,
I am tired. I am very tired.
I am very tired. Like, I want to do this and I want to do that. And I want to, there's a lot of, like, having to know my own limitations, kind of like you talked about, of, like, I have all these ideas, but I, like, you know, can't. I also am starting to, like, reckon with, like, I don't know, can I say this out loud here? Like, the disability side of CPTSD.
Yeah.
Of, like, oh my god, this is actually only because I'm finally starting to see what it looks like without it. Because I have been doing a lot of healing work to be like, oh my god, other people just live like this?
Yeah. Yeah. Isn't that something?
Oh my god! And I'm like, oh, this is disabling.
Yeah.
I did not realize because I had no benchmark to compare it against. And now I'm just like, oh.
Yeah. Like, you mean to tell me I'm not, like, it's not normal to rehearse a conversation for 4.5 hours for a 5-minute conversation you're going to have with a random stranger the next day?
Don't ask me.
I do it, but I know a lot of people who don't.
Yeah.
And it's exhausting going through those motions.
Yeah. And even just the physical side too of, like, oh my god, I don't have the energy, you know, like, oh, this is, my nervous system will flare much easier. And, like, oh, I can't.
But I think that, Aimee, you shouldn't have to. And that's kind of where I'm starting to see, like, what if everyone picked up a little bit more? We would all do a lot less.
Amazing.
Like, what if we were like, and I'm going to use, like, a silly example. I want to throw so many parties now. I threw one and now I'm hooked. So,
and it was a great party. I really want you to throw another party simply because of how fun it was.
I want to do a soup party. I want to do a PowerPoint party. I want to do, like, I got ideas, but there's so many. And I'm like, there's so much effort that goes into it. What if other people also did these things and then we just shared the workload? It would be really nice if more people were willing to take on some of that lift. And I know that we're all kind of waiting for someone else to do it. And I know that we're all tired. And I know that we're all doing the best that we can. And I'm not trying to say that anyone should do more than they can. I'm just saying, like, if we were supporting each other more, if we were working cross identity, if we were really being in community with each other, where we considered all of these different what are words? The different things that people bring to the table, like, we could do so much. It is just, we're used to one person doing it. We're used to an authority doing it, and we don't need to wait for an authority to do it.
No, let me be the one to tell you, you can do it. You just do it. You just do it until they tell you no, and then you fix that one problem and you keep doing it.
I say that all the time. I'm like, I just do stuff until I get in trouble, and I haven't gotten in trouble too bad yet. So.
Yeah,
I'm still waiting to get in trouble for this podcast.
Like, it turns out the rules are mostly made up and unenforced. Like, it's been, thinking about, Nicole was there from the beginning. Like, the Pride group that we're a part of just got recognized for the annual conference we put on.
Yeah.
And in the beginning, it was just like, can we do this? Why can't we do this? Like, what are they going to do? Stop us? They didn't.
Yeah.
Like, we just made something up and invited some people, and we're like, hey, we're doing this. It's wild. Nobody stops you.
It's so weird. It's so weird how much people are not only willing to let you do stuff, but then they're like, yeah, cool, you're doing things, because everyone else wants you to do things. They just don't want to be in charge of it.
And then, and I always volunteer to do wild things.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, of course, right? And so, like, right now I'm working on a pilot project to bring assistive devices to all of the storefront offices for deaf people.
Yay!
Like, I'm working on that. I'm close. But
that's rad.
That has nothing to do with my job. That has nothing to do with anything. But it's, like, the right thing to do.
Right.
And I'm not going to stop doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's what fuels me. And having these conversations is what fills my cup.
Yeah.
And I would love to be able to do this podcast 3 times a week. I don't have the bandwidth.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't have the bandwidth.
Well, we talk about in my job right now, we talk about, like, because we're a compliance-based team. So we talk about compliance projects and we talk about heart projects. Yeah. But I think with anything, right, there's like your PD projects and then there's your heart projects.
Yeah.
And you've got to have some kind of balance, especially for those of us that work in state government, because otherwise it's just demoralizing.
Because it feels like sometimes the cards are stacked against you.
Well, because I think they are.
Involuntary laugh, Nicole.
Oh my god. We move at the speed of snot, and there's like constant roadblocks, and it is extremely demoralizing. I was making a face at when Aimee said that. But I think that, like, it has really instilled in me, at least, a sense of, like, okay, I know that this time it's not going to be successful, so I don't have to worry too much. I'm not going to, like, stress too much. I'm just going to be persistent. I am annoyingly persistent. I'm going to make sure this happens, even if everyone hates me afterwards.
And the nice thing about state government is there's so many terrible things happening that almost never will someone hate you forever.
Oh, yeah.
Like, everything just keeps on churning. But I think, Nicole, you make a really good point that I think is really true of, like, liberation movements writ large. It makes me think of the book of essays, We Do This Till We Get Free, by Miriam Kaba, I think is her name. But she talks about, like, we don't get to abolition just like poof tomorrow, right? Like, we try stuff. And to Nicole's point, like, if we're pretty sure it's not going to work, then why are we fretting about perfection? Like, if we can just move it a little further, let's start the process moving, and we'll continue to refine as we go.
And I think that sort of flies in the face of the conventional wisdom, which is not the correct way, I don't think, is we tend to not want to do anything until we have it perfected, until we have the system in place. And so instead of doing something and getting the ball rolling, more often than not, it's like, well, let's wait until we
Yeah.
get it right. Some things can't wait, and we should just do it.
Well, and
And then
perfection.
tweak
Mhm.
along the way.
And perfectionism is like a characteristic of white supremacy culture.
Yeah.
And also something that a lot of us have learned in abusive households too.
Mm.
Both.
Yeah.
And then the military indoctrination.
Oh, yeah,
too.
sure.
Mm-hmm.
Like permission, I think that like has come up in different ways multiple times, like permission to be messy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I chuckle because I never had permission to be messy.
Yeah.
And now my apartment's kind of a mess, and
Oh, so is mine.
I'm at ease with it finally.
Yeah.
Because my mess is not that messy. I am learning.
You don't want to see my house.
It's been actually really interesting, and I know we're totally off topic now, but like I had a couple of kids over, 3 kids over the weekend, and it is so interesting to watch their parents and them come over and be like, no, don't touch I mean, if you can, I mean, you can't if you're on the podcast, but I've got lots of stuff. I got lots of little things to touch.
Yeah.
And I'm okay with kids touching them. I'm honestly even okay with kids breaking them. It's okay for the most part. I have the things that are really fragile up high, but there is something that like changes in both the parents and the kids to get to interact with things. Why did I start talking about this?
Get messy.
Oh, get messy.
We were talking
Yes.
about, yeah.
Where it's like, yes, you're allowed to touch that. Yes, you're allowed to make a mess. Yes, you're allowed to get into things that you don't think that you're supposed to. It is so important to get to have spaces where even as a young person or as an adult, or you get to like interact with stuff that you don't normally. Kids learn how to be gentle by handling things that are breakable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's such a good reminder to like the question I was asking earlier too. Like, what do we do when we mess up? Like, we learn how to be careful and kind with each other by breaking things, right? By messing up. Now I really want to know if there's a Bluey episode about what to do when you make a mistake, because I feel like
Probably.
Chili or Bandit would have some very good wisdom for this occasion.
It's hilarious. We were just talking about that before you got
I
here,
love
too.
Bluey. Unabashedly.
This is 3 adults who don't have children, and I'm with you. I freaking love Bluey.
Okay, it's healed something within me.
You know, I fell in love with Bee and Puppy Cat over the weekend, so no judgment there.
Cute. When I got my wisdom teeth out, I just spent a week watching My Little Pony.
Yes. We watched a My Little Pony episode for professional development at my job.
Which episode?
It's the only episode I've ever seen.
Okay.
So it's the one where I think they try to get Applejack to take a spa day.
Aww.
And instead of taking a spa day, Applejack has to fix everything and leaves very complicated instructions for the care of the farm behind. And it was all about like staying in your lane and trusting other people and like letting things go. It was a very we had a great discussion about it.
Yeah.
There's so much that we can learn from children's media these days.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. And like, cause like,
They really got the big brains in there.
yes. And simplistic messaging that I can actually digest.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah. And they don't take that capitalistic approach to it yet.
Yeah.
Yet. Mm-hmm.
Somebody needs to take Lefty Theory and make it a children's show.
Yes.
That would benefit so many people, I
It
think.
would.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then the last soapbox I will get into today.
Yeah, do it.
It is because, like, you're talking about the healthcare system, right? And how messed up the healthcare system is.
Yes.
And what I hate is when people talk about socialized medicine. And like, we don't have it. Yes, we do have it in this country. It's called the VA system.
Yeah.
It works pretty darn well. And I would imagine that there's two things about the whole Medicare or healthcare for all that I think people are missing.
Mm-hmm.
One is how much money we're already paying for our insurance premiums and how much money we're already paying in our deductibles and all of this other stuff. So the idea that it's going to cost you more money to make socialized medicine is kind of a misnomer. Because if they take out the medical middleman, you take out the insurance companies, you take out all of these people that have their little pieces in the pie of healthcare, we can afford it. And so the conversation about healthcare and healthcare for all has always been, we can't afford it. But if you take that away, why can't we do it?
And I think like some of the problems that we see with the VA, I think also about like the last time we actually tried to do public housing in this country, the issue is that we underfunded it.
100%.
It's not that it didn't work, it's that we
100%.
didn't give it the resources to actually succeed.
Mm-hmm.
Arguably on purpose.
There's a lot of, yeah. And anybody who wants an example of what that could be like, you would take the difference between Portland VA and the Seattle VA.
Oh, really?
So the Seattle VA got a huge grant, and they built this state-of-the-art mental health facility in their hospital. They spared no expense. They created this entire infrastructure. So now if you're in Seattle and you go to the VA, you don't have to go to the emergency room to see somebody.
Oh.
They have pathways for you to see somebody that same day and other pathways because they funded it on a pilot project.
Yeah.
And if the funding has stayed there, I would imagine the level of care has maintained. But there was, if you fund it, it could work.
And I think that gets to like the big issue with a lot of things is that the funding and the cost savings are not allocated the same way. Because when I was working at a homeless shelter, like one of the regular things we'd have is folks would end up who were homeless would end up in the ER for things that were not ER level of care, but there was nowhere else for them to go. But you weren't seeing like the people who would spend the money on better solutions would not be the ones seeing the cost savings. And so there was just this huge mismatch where like, yes, actually the money evens out. If not, you get a better deal. It's just that different people are paying for it. But actually it serves people better. And isn't that the point anyway?
Oh God, that's the point anyway. Sorry. I'm so mad. I'm so mad at how we have strayed so far from the idea of a society. Because the whole freaking point of us being in a society is that we are collectively funding things like roads and schools and healthcare. Like, we are stronger together. That's why we have agreed to this social construct experiment of a society. If it was just, we're going to live next to each other and we're going to all have our own entirely separate worlds and lives, we wouldn't have to have a government structure. We wouldn't have roads. We wouldn't have schools. We wouldn't have a lot of these things. And people think that we are, it's this American individualistic perspective where they're like, I'm going to just live my life by myself. No, you're not. No, you're not.
No.
Soapbox.
So this played out a few times in recent memory, and I'm curious if you had this similar experience because if you worked at a homeless shelter. We had a hospital. I don't think I want to name the name, but there was a hospital that if you came to the emergency room and they thought you were drug seeking, they would actually trespass you from the hospital and prohibit you from coming back to receive any medical treatment.
We had people trespass from the hospital, but not that I know of because of that.
Yeah, it happened all the time. Like, it still happens to this day.
I mean, it probably did happen there, and I just didn't hear about it.
Yeah.
But that's also a different story when I was in St. Paul, Minnesota, where there were 2 hospitals within walking distance of the shelter I worked at.
Yeah.
Like, where I live now, there's 1 hospital. And where I lived growing up, there was 1 hospital for 30 miles any direction.
And
plus.
this area is the only hospital for 100 miles in any direction.
Oh my God.
So then you have people that can't access unless they have, like, having a heart attack, life-ending treatment available before they can go back.
And that's so
They then
subjective. Go ahead.
I was going to say, they then shouldn't have to pay any taxes that go towards medical care because they can't
But
access it.
also, it's so subjective as to what someone determines as, like, drug seeking.
I hate that term.
Yes.
And that's so. And that also is subject to so many biases.
Also,
like, oh,
that it goes back to what I was saying earlier about, like, attention seeking. If you're drug seeking, that means that there is a need that is not being met.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because escapism is a huge part of it sometimes.
Look, we live in a hellscape.
Right?
Who doesn't want to escape occasionally, you know?
You're
like,
not lying.
Having recently been introduced to herbal supplements, I have found it to be, like, an incredible way to actually stay balanced when I am, like, it lets me be off when I'm off, which gives me more energy to be on when I'm on. You know, which is, folks can talk anything, you know, there's lots of different opinions about supplements and other things. But, like, I think, too, the thing that keeps coming up is that, like, actually the world that we're living in right now isn't working so well. And so, of course, like, people want out in lots of different forms.
Yeah, because the other thing I see happening, too, is as our society makes it more and more unaffordable for people to live in these highly dense area where the services are, people are moving farther away, and then they don't have access to any services because they can't afford to live near the services.
I was just at a workshop at a conference last week where the presenter was saying, yep, so I am 90 miles one direction from any kind of physical health care, and 2.5 hours from my dentist one way. And it was just like, and that's the dental issue is a common thing we hear from our colleagues in more rural parts of the state, is it's like, what are people so, like,
yeah.
But like, it's hard on everything, but especially some of these more acute things that we've been talking about makes it so much worse and harder to manage.
Well, and there's this, because I'm a big old nerd. Every year, Oregon.
Yeah, you are.
Oh no! Every year, Oregon puts out this report called "Oregon by the Numbers," and it
whoop, whoop. Shout out to the Ford Family Foundation.
Oh, it's so good. But
Love
it breaks down by county in Oregon. It always makes me wonder, like, what's happening in this county where all of the women of this age range flee, or like, the housing cost here is so affordable to me, but also their unemployment rate is outrageous. And it's like, in order to afford to live, you have to be so far away from any of the resources that allow you to live. It's exhausting.
And I think about, again, tying in, like, addiction and substance use, I think about my own family and family members who have experienced addiction and substance use disorder, and I look at where they live and what, like, other healthy pro-social options are available to them, and I'm like,
I get it.
I mean, honestly, I understand how you got here. Like, I don't even disagree with your choice. I really hate the outcome of it, but, like, I can't say that I would make a different choice if I was in your shoes.
Right.
Yeah. I love my dad. I love my dad to death. He's awesome. He has a huge drinking problem.
Yeah.
And the reason he moved to Costa Rica is so he could afford to drink.
Yeah.
That's the harsh reality.
Yeah.
Because he couldn't afford rent and food off of his Social Security. So he moved to Costa Rica and Nicaragua. Because he could find an apartment for $300 a month and be not bothered.
See, but the thing is, like, here, there are places where you can find a 1-bedroom apartment for like $600 a month. But what Aimee was saying was you drive 2.5 hours one way to get to any sort of support. So it's not really, that's not the full cost.
And what condition is that place?
Yes.
At $600 a month.
Yeah.
Because I got to be honest, like I could not afford the place that I'm living,
Same.
even on a state salary, if it wasn't for my VA disability. That's the only reason I can live on my own and not have a roommate. If it wasn't for that, I would have to live in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah. I had to move because my rent was, and it was this crappy little 1-bedroom apartment right off of the freeway. And I had to move because I couldn't afford it. And I work for the man.
Your new place is so much better, though.
Oh, it's
just
so
for
cute.
the record. But, like, I mean, to that point, too, like, I live in a dangerous part of town and have had to deal with a decent amount of, just a non-trivial amount of property crime. But my rent is affordable for one person, and that's only because I got in when I did.
Yeah.
Like, and it is, again, I'm making state money, but, you know.
Especially when the requirements to rent is that it has to be less than what? Is it 30% now? Like if you make more, if you make less, if you have to, the rent has to be less than 30% of your income in order for you to qualify for some of these places.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And if you don't have a credit score over 650, you can't even apply. Like with this capitalistic society, how do you even get that?
Welcome to the new podcast. Capitalism's bad.
Yeah.
We're your hosts.
We do need a name.
For capitalism is bad.
No,
that's it.
This segment for the three of us, the regularly occurring.
Yeah.
It always seems to end up with that.
Show.
We can have the best conversation, but as soon as you let us talk just a little too long, it always turns into capitalism's bad. Everything's expensive.
Yes.
How about the anti-cappy crew?
I feel like that could be a fun play because of sans capitalism, because SAN sans capitalism, like without it.
I love it. Well, we've been at this for an hour and a half.
Oh my gosh, really? Well, it goes so quickly. It's a fun time.
I agree. We will do this again.
Yes, excellent.
And I just want to say, I want to close out on something.
Yeah.
So about a month ago, I had the opportunity to record a podcast with the owners of the Southside Speakeasy.
Sweet.
Unfortunately, the audio didn't record.
No.
So after an hour's worth of conversation, it was just one of those, like, such a huge disappointment. So I just wanted to give a shout out to them because they were such awesome hosts and they are doing some amazing things with the place now.
They're the new owners of Salem's favorite Queer Elks Club.
Yeah.
But they're doing really cool, like, more clubby new things, like, but also you cannot beat steak night on Tuesdays.
100%.
So.
Yeah. And so
they're so cool. I love Southside Speakeasy.
They're so sweet. And just their story and everything about them.
I wish it had recorded because now I want to know their story.
I'm trying to do it again.
Do it again. The people are crying.
Yes.
Yeah.
Please, Speakeasy, we want to hear your story.
And I just wanted to throw that out there
One more time.
I felt they just deserved to have some recognition.
Yeah.
Because of what they're sort of building, but also what they're going through right now.
Oh.
And there's a lot of hate out there.
There's a lot of hate out there.
And the one thing I can say that I dedicate this podcast to is stopping hate. anything we can do to stop that hate.
Can I have one more soapbox then?
Yes, please.
There is a new DOJ bias and hate crime line. It's not that new, but it is new to me. And so maybe it's new to some of your other podcast listeners.
Oh, 100%.
They can call in or enter it online and report instances of hate crimes, bias crimes, or even just instances of bias, right? Not sure if it rises to the level of crime. Report it. We're creating it creates a database. It creates a picture of this is what's actually happening. Because there's a lot out there. And also, what I have learned from this is they also have a fund to help victims of hate and bias crimes recover or recuperate. So don't wait, fill it out, and help us keep track as a community and keep each other safe.
And the last thing I'll put to add on that too is if you're a bystander, file that report.
Oh yeah, that's a good point.
Because there's a huge difference. And I don't know if this is the same in your circles, but with the disability community, there's a huge difference between the person with a disability standing up for themselves and having somebody who isn't with a disability saying something on their behalf.
Mm-hmm.
It makes a lot of difference when somebody that's just random actually says something. I wish that wasn't the case.
It does, though.
But it makes a lot of difference.
Well, in the moment, even be like, hey, and I think sometimes people don't speak up because we're not sure what to say. But even if you say, hey, this isn't cool, hey, stop, leave them alone. That is enough to interrupt and create that space for someone to get out. And also to remind them that oh, this really isn't okay. Right? Because I think we kind of gaslight ourselves too of oh, was this real? Did this really happen? No, they can't have. Yes. Affirm it for each other.
Right.
And what I will say about the DOJ line is that they're very survivor focused. They are not gonna take legal action if you don't want to, which is something that I think is really important to let people know, because a lot of our other systems, if you report it, you don't have a choice.
Yeah.
Here, if you report it, you still have a choice.
That is really good information to have.
And so they just... Sorry, Nicole, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think that it's important that when these systems exist, you are not the one who has to determine if it rises to the level of severity.
Yes.
That is what they're doing. It is important that everyone does utilize these, because really what they're doing is they're creating a repository. They're creating a standard or a baseline. And so you reporting these things, regardless of how severe it is, does make a difference and does help.
Call it in.
Please. Because if you have 30 people who call in 30 different events, even if they're minor, that's something that shows this entity or organization has done it 30 times.
Right.
It's worth, even though they're minor, it adds up. Let's have a different conversation with them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So how do you find that?
I will can I send you the link so you can put it in the podcast notes?
Yep.
Cool. Mm-hmm. And also I think it'd be really, if you're looking for more guests, it'd be cool to talk to someone. If you have not talked with Faye Setzwater.
I will never say no to a guest either of you recommend.
Okay. Yeah, she's the one that, that's who. So she spoke an event that John Gendron heard about and then posted in the Pride line, which is how the Pride chat, which is how I heard about it and called it in. But I think that she would be a really cool podcast guest for Shawn, talking about her own story, but also about the bias and hate line.
Yes.
Yeah.
And if either of you know any dragon dads.
Dragon dads?
Yeah.
Is that dad of trans kid?
Yeah.
Okay.
There's an organization that's called Dragon Dads.
Yeah, they've been at Pride.
They were at Pride.
Yeah, they were at Pride last year too.
And neither of the dads that were there would welcome an in-person interview.
Oh, yeah.
They were afraid of public speaking. So I was like, I gotta find somebody.
Let me think.
I know at least one dad of a trans kiddo who might be not part of that group, but might be interesting for you. Anyway.
Awesome.
Cool.
Anyway, let's wrap this up.
Woo!
Thank you so much. Y'all are amazing.
This is a blast.
Always. Be kind, y'all. Till next time.
Bye.
Goodbye.